this test is redundant. It doesn't add any value. It binds you to what you have now. While it is true that redundancy is sometimes something you might want to keep. How cute are they? Not in your tests, all right? So now let's look at a second anti-pattern for private tests. So some people say, okay, and let me say this. The people who do these things, who are they? They're people who care, right? The people who don't care are not writing these tests. So this is not a criticism. This is an attempt to shed some clarity on this issue so that the people who care can do things that are less painful and more useful. And so I have this private method. Here's what people say. They say, well, I send it in the Geertjes method. If I don't send it, Geertjes can't possibly be right. And so they take this perfectly good test that is complete proof that it's okay, and they do this. You see it all the time. They set an expectation that an outgoing query message they set an expectation that a private method will get sent. This expectation is an over-specification. It adds costs and provides absolutely no benefit. It binds you to the current implementation. A test that insists that you continue to send an invisible message creates a world where you can't improve the code without breaking the test. This expectation does not make it safe to refactor. It makes it impossible to do so. So don't do this. And the rules for private methods are don't test them. Don't make assertions about their values. Don't set expectations that you'll send them. Now, as we all know, we live in a practical world, and all rules are meant to be broken. I break this rule all the time. If you have a complicated private algorithm, you may not be able to get it running unless you TDD it. If you're dinking around with a complicated private algorithm, it can be really helpful to get an error message near the offending line of code. However, what I would tell you is while these tests might have value early on, as time passes, what they do is they keep other people from being willing to improve your private code because they do not want to screw with those tests. After I write tests of private methods, very often I just can't bear to delete them at that point in time. They're like my children, right? Like I'm really attached to them. And so if I leave tests of private methods in a test, I segregate them, I put them all together in one place, and then I compound my sins by putting a comment in my test. And that comment says this: if these tests fail, delete them. Right? There is a point, if you keep them, it's a slippery slope. And it's gonna switch to where instead of saving you money, they are going to cost you money. And you should proactively delete those tests before that happens. Don't let your private tests keep people from improving your code because they don't want to deal with those tests. And so that's it for messages sent to self. The adult rule is ignore them. And the practical rule is do what saves you money. And so now part 3, outgoing query messages. So first, spoiler alert. So we're at the outgoing query message cell. I'm going to show you, we're going to derive rules that are just exactly like the rules we just derived. And I'm going to show you examples that are going to give you deja vu because they're going to look exactly like the examples you just saw. So I'm going to whip through them, and then we're going to talk about why these things are the same. So we've already looked at these two things. These are both query messages to these objects. We're testing gear, so we're standing at gear's point of view. Gear has a collaborating object that's wheel, so it sends the diameter to the wheel object. And so, as is always true here, somebody's incoming is somebody else's outgoing. So if I'm standing over here, if my universe is the universe where I'm unit testing gear, that diameter message to wheel is an outgoing query message. So how should we test this? Well, again, the better question is how not to test it. Here's our perfectly good test that is complete proof that the Geertjes method works correctly. Sometimes people who cannot forget what they've seen inside the space capsule feel honor-bound to do this, to make an assertion about the value that's returned as a result of sending the outgoing query message. Now, remember, the receiver of an incoming query is solely responsible for assertions that involve state. This test is redundant. It duplicates a test it's the exact test that's already over in wheel. And when you make this assertion here, you've you've made it so that you cannot change the implementation without breaking the test over in wheel and then breaking the test in all of the places where you've also done this. It is unnecessary as proof of correctness of the result of gear inches. Again, there are times when you might want to keep redundancy. I don't know, nobody ever really laughs at that picture. And I don't understand it. Is it the shock? You have my permission to laugh if you want. Yeah, those dogs they're kind of alarming, I agree. It's an anti-pattern to do, all right, to keep that, to duplicate that test in the outgoing query side. So here's another anti-pattern. Sometimes, again, people of goodwill say, well, I surely have to send it. Surely, I must send that or it won't be correct. This, again, is an over-specification. It proves nothing. All it does is bind you to the current implementation and make it impossible to change the code without breaking the test.